our way of life. It's a part of the fact that each one of us must pay for our living by the sweat of our brows in one way or another. But the individual who has only one string on his bow, who has become tremendously involved in something, if he has suddenly decided that from here on his whole future lies in his ability to become an expert commuter technician or something of that type, so that he can handle vast sums of money by computation, such a person is apt to build all his success around this. He will hope that he will become great. He may be elevated. He may make the $50,000 or $75,000 a year bracket. He may own a mountain cabin, a yacht, and have a condominium by the sea. And he thinks he's really there. He has used that ability to get himself into a fortunate physical position. But you'll be surprised of how many people who have done this have come to me who are completely miserable. Why? Because there was no substitute in them to take care of adversities that are inevitable. The more we have, the more problems we have. And unless we have some kind of integrities with which to meet the problems, success becomes a ghastly travesty. The individual who has given his life to the computer goes through 2 or 3 divorces, has children who leave home as soon as they can, and becomes an old person, deserted and friendless. And no amount of money can pay for this. No matter how much he has, he thinks it will. But when the time comes, he is miserable. So the individual who tries to exploit certain factors of life must learn to finally that anything he does in the outer world of his environment must be adequately supported from within himself. This encapsulated creature within him must have the abilities to handle whatever arises as the result of the experiences of living. Thus, it is very important that this being in the body shall be firmly established in basic values. He must have gradually outgrown the temptations which would lure him into tragedy when the time comes. He must realize that while he is very much involved, he doesn't think about this. But when he reaches retirement, or when he is replaced by someone else, then all of a sudden he faces the fact that he's unable to live constructively. He has made a career instead of a life, and by doing so is bound someday to face his own tragedy. So in the building of these types of careers that we think about, we have to work, first of all, to get rid of the intemperances in our own attitudes. I've known some very wonderful people who were perfect snobs. They were generous, well-hearted, intentions to do well, but they just couldn't get over the fact that they were a little superior socially. Well, these gradually got into trouble. Several of them that I know of ended in retirement homes with nothing to look forward to. Snobbery is one that won't work. The individual who has jealousy is in a very bad spot, because jealousy is a constant effort to injure one we think is superior. And the impulse to injury is destroying ourselves. No destructive emotion that we can hold can do as much harm to another as it is doing to ourselves. Jealousy is very, very bad. Bigotry is also very bad. A certain person whose son threatened to marry outside of the religion said frankly, "I would rather see him dead than marry outside the religion." Now, that statement proved conclusively that the person himself had no religion, because religion cannot build on bitterness. It cannot build on prejudice, but most efforts are made in that direction. In fact, all of sectarianism is based upon a competition as to which sect is the most authentic. And in the process of trying to prove that, brotherly love is completely forgotten. So we have all these motives within ourselves that turn into acidity. Now, when we have a motive that just slips in occasionally, once in a great while, and we don't feel so good, we may be able to live with it. and it won't do us too much harm. But when we get a good solid character defect that sets in with everything that it's got, we cannot expect it to miss the physical body. A very large part of our physical health problem is psychosomatic. We are constantly injuring ourselves. The little cells in our bodies and all the organs, functions, and processes are according to natural law. And one of the most problem is the natural law of bodily health. And as several experts are now beginning to discover, the best way to have a healthy body is to have a peace of mind and peace of emotions. The individual who cannot control his temper is already sowing the seeds of trouble. The individual who cannot look constructively, happily, cheerfully upon things around him is on the way to being sick. Now, the link between his attitudes and his health may be, and usually is, through the ductless gland system, particularly the pituitary or thyroid or perhaps the pancreas. These different glands become, as it were, bridges between attitudes and body processes. Attitudes destroy digestion. It was said on one occasion that Napoleon would have been a very happy, quiet, private citizen if he hadn't had 2 or 3 extra drops of green bile in his liver. This is what did it. Anything that is detrimental to health is detrimental to character. And any detriment of character is detrimental to health. So no individual can be unpleasant and healthy. He may get along with it for a while. I've known people who reach 100 with a miserable disposition. It isn't how long they're going to live, but the way they live. These miserable dispositions simply had the privilege of suffering longer. That was the only difference. Instead of dropping out at 60, 70, or 80, they were so mean that they couldn't get out that quick. They had to just stay with it and get rid of all they could. They were afraid in departing that there was somebody left behind they hadn't insulted. So the problem of long life is not important if it's a poor life. The only reason a long life is helpful is that as long as we live, there is a chance of improvement. But by the time the average person is in his 80s or 90s, the probabilities of improvement are not very great. But they do happen. Just as I know people who have gone to college and got their degrees when they were 80. It can happen. It can fulfill a life purpose, but there should be a life purpose. Today we have another type of situation also to bear in mind. The home is a very fragile institution today. And with the gradual decline of the home, a very serious effect has been produced in the life of the individual, namely the loss of emotional normalcy. The individual who does not establish a home or cannot keep the one he has, the one who does not want children or is unable to be proper with them when they come, any individual who has not personal affections due to close family life is in trouble. And yet today, the great search for freedom, the great determination to be ourselves at all costs, has only one consequence. We are ourselves at one cost and almost unable to stand it. It's just too difficult. So everywhere where things that are not normal intrude themselves as social paralyses and practices, the individual in himself must have the courage to continue to do that which is necessary for the good of all concerned. If a person does grow as he ought to and should and will naturally, he grows not for himself alone. He is not growing simply to be a better person. He is growing also, or furthermore, to be a more useful person, to in one way or another contribute to the gradual growth of all that lives. And our civilization is moving very slowly because there are not enough people dedicated to improving it. There are a great many people who hope it'll get better. There are a great many people who are investing in a possible future, but not in hopes of the world getting better, but rather in hopes of profit to themselves. So in the problem of our own integration, This little individual thing, wrapped up like a caterpillar in a cocoon, which is ourselves, must find in that internal structure the key to survival, the key to being the kind of person they ought to be, the key to putting the emotional maturity in them to work in life. Now, supposing a person doesn't quite sure how much emotional maturity he has. Perhaps he figures he's rather adolescent or a pre-adolescent in his emotional facilities. He's not likely to be adolescent, however, because adolescence, for the most part, is a very outgoing emotional state. It's an individual spreading his feelings too quickly over too large an area. But in the older person, emotional maturity is the instinctive desire to be kind, to serve those in trouble, to carry other people's loads if possible. They can't do it, but they can think they do. And it's a good thought to think at best. To always be thoughtful, kind, considerate, to preserve affection. Every living thing must love. And the loss of love will not only result in a barren life, but it'll end in a complete breakdown of the digestion and the elimination and the probability of arteriosclerosis. You cannot break the emotional or mental laws without it reacting on the physical body. And the individual who doesn't care about his emotional and mental concerns because he's too wound up in his own purposes, doesn't like the feeling that comes along with a coronary or something of this nature. It has to be part of a plan. The individual to escape from the tyranny of false attitudes has got to discover a universe that is right, that he is basically part of a plan which is infinitely noble, absolutely constructive, completely useful, and beautiful in all its parts. But all this beauty is lost if he cannot appreciate it. All the wonder is sacrificed if he is incapable of the emotion of wonder. All his own progress and happiness are gone if he cannot contribute to the progress and happiness of others. This very important thing is to realize that we must have a warm, kindly feeling at all times. And most of all, we must have it when some attitude in ourselves suggests that we shouldn't have it. Then we are confronted by a person whom we would not naturally feel very much emotional constructiveness for. But then we must really try to understand what we would expect them to understand. And that is the turmoil, confusion, and complexity locked in this little cell, which is themselves. The individual is what he is because he is reacting to uncontrolled, undisciplined, immature pressures from within himself. We are doing the same thing. And if we are a little cold to him, chances are he'll be a little colder to us because we are applying the same rule that he has already discovered in his own nature. So I think it's very good, especially at this time of the year, when we are thinking more or less of transmutation, transformation, redemption, regeneration, and resurrection. We are thinking of some way of outwitting our own smallness. We want to grow bigger without giving up any of the habits that make us small. We want to be accepted for the virtues we ought to have and not for the ones we have developed and perfected. But in this time, the only way that we can really help to make a better world is to just look out a little bit at the world as it is and see how it corresponds with the world within us as we are. And if we observe intolerance, injustice, if we see corruption, war, suffering, privation, massacres going on in society, in small ways, most of these things are going on in our own inner lives. We are sacrificing beautiful thoughts to selfish ones. We are overriding the rights of other people in order to advance our own causes. We don't like the thought of a nation invading another nation. But we are invading other people all the time to use them for our own advantage. Every fault we see around us is just an objectification of faults within us, because these faults do not come from the sky, they do not come from the earth, nor do they come from the air. They come from the living things themselves. And most of the mental and emotional faults we know come from ourselves. We've been here a long time and we still have the faults. We've been here millions of years and we still have wars and rumors of wars, and the end is not yet. The answer being that we haven't gotten rid of the rumors of war inside of ourselves. We haven't learned not to be angry at someone who does something we don't like. We haven't learned yet to return a soft word for a bitter one. We have not yet learned the importance of forgiving other people for the very faults that we ourselves may have. All this is part of a lesson. And nation after nation has faded away because it didn't get the message. And it took with it the people who didn't get the message. The nation wasn't destroyed by being pushed off of the earth or something. It was destroyed by falling apart from within itself. The people in it broke all the rules of right living. They got away with it for a time, and then finally the mass of their own mistakes buried them. Thus, we are told, was the end of the Atlantic Empire. And unless people grow and protect their values, we're not going to have very much values. This is why we must go to work equally and immediately. Let's say to ourselves, if we can, that for the rest of whatever years are allotted to us, we will make a real, sincere effort to be grateful, to be kind, to be gentle, to be thoughtful, and that we will not condemn anybody from a prejudice, that we will not be intolerant of other people. Now, this takes a little bit of thinking, because what is intolerance? The individual who has the worst dose of it feels that it is nothing but integrity. Intolerance to him is the fact that he cannot agree with that which he believes to be wrong. Well, this is a little difficult. But also, on what does he base the belief that other people's approaches to things are wrong and his are right? Is he really justified in a condemnation? Or is he condemning out of policy? Is he condemning out of tradition? Is he condemning a religion because it isn't the same that his own parents went to? Is he condemning on superficial grounds that have nothing to do with value? Is he unable to recognize that every religion in the world teaches the golden rule, and that to condemn any of them is to more or less to condemn the brotherhood of man? He doesn't believe that. He thinks that brotherhood is tied up with a creed. He thinks that integrity belongs only to one school of thought. If he is an Emersonian, that's it. But if he happens to follow Leibniz, Emerson isn't so good. And it is the same with everything we do. We measure politics very largely the same way. If no one voted except a person who personally knew the candidate, it would be a very different story. But most people vote according to tradition, and a few of them according to appearance. They see the portrait of the candidate and they say, that's a good-looking man, I guess I'll vote for him. But they don't remember that the portrait was taken 30 years before he went into politics. So we do not think things through. Let us hesitate to make decisions which we cannot justify. And if we feel we can justify, let's be careful and search and make sure that we do have that right. If we can do this type of thing a little more often, I think we'll all have a little happier time in this world. Now, we know that we are in terribly difficult moments in history. We know that everywhere around us, integrities are being compromised. We know also that these compromises are very largely based upon the selfishness in each human being. Now, selfishness is not necessarily all financial. Selfishness can be stubbornness. It can be unwillingness to change in an emergency. Selfishness also, of course, may be to put ourselves first in any situation. We think we have the right to do this. Factually, we do not have the right. All we have is the privilege of being right in the situation we are in. And rightness depends upon consequences, at least in part. If the attitude we take is not supported by natural affection, if it is not consistent with the revelation of the great faiths of mankind, if it does not bring happiness, kindness, and strength to those in trouble, then we might as well forget it. It's doing no good to anybody. Now, as we enter into this very complicated situation, it becomes obvious that many of the values which we have cherished for a long time are not going to hold. They're not going to work out. We're not going to be able to go on as we have for the last 25 centuries, treating each other with a good spirit. We cannot go on trying to fight our way to peace. We cannot go on living as we please in a world in which there are laws that must be obeyed. Somewhere along the line, education, religion, science, something has got to point out the inevitability of universal law. We're going to have to realize that we can outwit our neighbor, we can corrupt our politicians, we can exploit our peoples, but we cannot for one moment change one jot or tittle of the universal program. Whenever we break the law breaks us. This has gone on from the beginning. Therefore, we must accept this. We must accept the fact that we cannot change realities, but we can, in due time, learn to accept them. Now, realities are not so bad. The idea that a reality is going to make a prisoner of us, or that we're going to be hopelessly moronic or mediocre simply because we keep the rules, is entirely wrong. We cannot survive without keeping the rules. Now, if financial conditions get worse because we keep on breaking the rules, we are going to wake up sometime and find that we have destroyed the entire economic system. If we discover this, we're probably going to make some other unpleasant discoveries. We're going to find that we have invested everything we have in something we never made honorable, that we have built a tremendous system with no integrities in it, and integrities have been assumed to be a detriment. So we keep on going until finally, one of these days, for one reason or another, it's going to fall apart. And then we are going to suddenly come into a situation that we're not going to like, but which we have brought upon ourselves. If we cannot make the corrections necessary, if we are so locked in ourselves in our mistakes that we are unable to voluntarily change, then nature takes hold on the situation, because nature is going to win out ultimately anyway, no matter what we do. And nature is going to say, if you can't change, we'll change you. And when that change comes, we may find ourselves in a rather unhappy situation. Many of the privileges we have abused will be taken away. Many of the duties we have neglected will be thrust upon us. Many of the problems that we now face will disappear, but in their place will be other problems, more challenging and more difficult and demanding greater integrity. So the point of all is to get started so that in whatever happens in the future, as long as we're in this world, we will be able to adjust to the facts, and that we will never balk from inside ourselves when it comes to making changes that are proper for the good of all. That we are not going to continue to build our entire life upon the gratification of our personal desires. We have got to find out that the only desiring that is inevitable is the desiring of deity. Whatever the deity determines or decides upon, we will do. And there's going to be no fussing and fuming about it. But deity is not an aggressive, despotic deity. It is not a god of vengeance or a god of wars or violence. It is for each individual a symbol of parental integrity. It is a good parent bringing up its children to be good people. And if of their own accord they get to be wayward and delinquent, then necessary for the parent to correct these mistakes and in doing so, to bring the person back to his own values. When the temptations on the outside are lessened by the collapse of a system, the privileges of growing from the inside are increased. A great deal of our trouble lies in the fact that external things are so complicated that we are dazed by them. We cannot adjust them to the internal values that we need. We must always sometime ask ourselves, how much am I worth if I lose everything I have? The answer is, you're worth just exactly what you are, never worth any more. So if you lose what you have, you're like the man who lost what he had. He said, I've lost all I have and I'm on my feet again. And I remember in the Great Depression in 29, I was already at work at that time. And I remember one man told me, he said, I lost everything. I was wiped out in a couple of hours. But you know, he said, when I went home, I went to bed and had the first night's sleep I'd had in 5 years. When you lose it, then you can be yourself again. When you're no longer completely slave to possessions or ambitions, there's some chance for the goodness in nature to come through. This man probably became a real human being as a result of having false gods taken away from him. And this is true of all of us. And I think the great symbol of this decision is to be found largely in this particular season of the year, when at the vernal equinox we have a new birth in time, a new opportunity to grow, a new opportunity to correct ourselves, and we also have a new birth or a new life thrust upon us. Each year is like each day. It is a new life. It is Dante's new life. It is the symbol of the new opportunity to succeed where previously we may have failed. In this new life there will be room for all the improvements that we can regard as necessary. In this new life we can accomplish. We can be better people. The new life is a new opportunity to grow. If we take it as a new opportunity to exploit somebody, then we will not grow. But if we use it as a new opportunity to serve the common good in some way, large or small, we will then be one step closer to maturity. Maturity for the average modern person cannot come until most of the false objectives have gradually been killed off. And the nature and life itself is taking away those false objectives which have made us prisoners to vanity and fallacy for ages. It all started sometime when the competitive idea was that we could be richer than somebody else by taking something away from him. There's once a time, Croesus, who is remembered as the world's richest man of ancient times, showed a philosopher his treasury. And in that treasury were all kinds of jewels and gold and wonderful things and ornaments. And Croesus was showing it with great gusto to this scholar. And the scholar said to him, yes, Croesus, you are right. It is beautiful. But a man with a little better iron will take it all away from you. And this is what happens with this type of thing. Anything that we can get that from the outside, someone a little smarter can take away from us. When we got it by being smart, that was an honorable action. When we lose it by the smartness of another, that is a false and deceitful and dishonorable act. But in this new problem of things, it is beginning to dawn on a great many people that the old values were right. We are beginning to realize in all parts of the world that the revelations of the great teachers of mankind were right. We are beginning to realize the beauty, the sublimity, the permanence of kindness, of gentleness, of tolerance, of thoughtfulness. We begin to know the meaning of the Good Samaritan, how it is possible for the individual to store up treasures of value that will help him all his days. Now today, with situations uncertain, many people are not quite sure in their own minds what's going to happen to them when they leave here. They know one thing for sure. Anything they have here, whether they got it honestly or dishonestly, is not going with them. But they are not sure just exactly what's going to happen. Well, one thing seems to be inevitable, as Socrates pointed out. He said only one of two things can happen. One, then you're not going to be anything. There's going to be nothing more. You're through, finished. But he said that doesn't seem very practical. Why should we be through and finished when we're only half-baked now? How can we say we're graduating when we practically flunked the course? Other than, he also said, the other thing is that we're going into a larger life than we've ever known, in which most of the questions we ask will be answered, and that we will have an understanding of life and of ourselves that's impossible in this life. It must be one of the two. Well, to most people today, it must be one of the two. If they're theologically minded, then they will think they're going on. If they're not theologically minded, they will think they would sleep forever. But regardless of how you figure it and whatever you're thinking about, don't forget that those who do not believe in life after death can build a heaven here by growing and maturing themselves. And those who believe in a life after death will be better fitted for it when they get there. It's got to be one or the other. The other thing is, as the ancient Hindus said, the other thing is that if you're not a fish nor fowl, if you're neither good enough or bad enough, when you're sort of in between, there's only one thing to do: come back here and try again. So if you're not too good to go to the underworld, and you're not good enough to get to heaven, then back here you go. But if by chance that is the way it happens, then what we are as an internal power within ourselves is certainly transmitted to the new personality. And any good we have gained that become part of ourselves will become part of our character in the future. So anyhow you figure it, whether it's simply physical health now, or mental and emotional comfort, or whether it is a hope of the future, or if it's a fear of the continuance of present or future policies that are inadequate, everything points to the need for change. And all change begins with us. All change begins in the human heart. And for most part, as Mencius pointed out, everything that is necessary to us is the result of the child in the heart. The spiritual part of ourselves, the reality in us, is childlike, natural and simple. It is not highly complicated. It is simply gracious and loving like a small child who has not yet learned to fear. We cannot be innocent because we have been around too long, but we can be virtuous, which is the postgraduate course. We start in ignorance and end in virtue. And by ending in virtue, we will fulfill our destiny and become good and faithful servants in the everlasting house. And at this season of the year, when transmutation is on everyone's mind, when we're looking forward to the earth opening again and spring coming forth with flowers and birds and living things, when we begin to have faith in the continuance of the harvest and the ripeness of the earth, and we realize that we're in a world, in a cosmos, in a conscious state in which nature has provided everything necessary for the advancement of all the realities of life. The thing it hasn't provided for is excess. And the moment excess comes in, the realities are forgotten. So with this point of view of mind, and always thinking a little bit about the future, about how we're going to wake up tomorrow, whether we can get rid of some of the problems that have annoyed us for so long, let us remember that to begin with, we must search in ourselves. And wherever we find a false value, wherever we make a decision that cannot be reasonably and constructively demonstrated, wherever we have to gain our end by breaking the golden rule, wherever we have to satisfy our natures by condemning someone else, where these things happen, we are still in great need of self-directives, self-censure, self-reorganization, so that in the end, as the days come, we will meet them joyously and with love. For love suffereth long and is kind. And love is the only relationship between human beings that can ever bring peace to the world. That which brings peace to our heart is love, to our family, to our nation, to our world. These are all the pieces, the qualities, the gentleness, the kindness that makes for eternal cooperation and brings about ultimately the unity of all that lives. And in our loving, we must not forget the birds and the flowers and everything that nature has provided. By the time we get through admiring the wonders of things as they are, we will be inclined to get over the disillusionments which we suffer as a result of things they appear to be, as they appear to be. Actually, we live in a good world, and if we're good enough, we can enjoy it. And if we're still better, we can keep the world the way we know it ought to be. Well, I guess that's all for today. This afternoon, after a slight intermission, we are going to have a little meeting here and discuss the year of the smooth water bore.